Hello and welcome to the Tech Mojo. This is Nilan, and today in this video we will talk about handling the XML request and response in Spring Boot REST APIs. The REST controller annotation in Spring Boot is designed to automatically serialize Java object into JSON or XML based on the content negotiation strategy defined in your controller. The REST controller annotation combines the controller annotation and the response body annotation. It tells Spring that the class is a controller where every method returns a domain object instead of a view. If your controller is annotated with REST controller annotation, then the payload is automatically getting converted to JSON or XML based on the value defined in the accept header. Similarly, the response object is automatically converted into JSON or XML based on the content type header defined in your controller configuration. Spring internally uses the Jackson library, so we don't need to serialize or deserialize anything manually, either before returning the object to the user or while accepting the payload. Now, for example, if you look at my screen, I've created a movies controller, and my movies controller is annotated with the REST controller annotation. So I haven't specified any content negotiation strategy here. We will see how the default behavior in Spring Boot without specifying any content header or the accept type. Now here I have three methods. The first method is getMovies. The getMovies method returns the list of movies present within my MongoDB, and the return type of this method is the list type. Now the second method here, the createMovie method. The createMovie method is basically a post endpoint, and what it means is you can pass the content body. Now here I'm passing the movies DTO as my request body. The request body, which is movie DTO in this case, is then getting converted into the movie object, and then we are storing the data into the database. Now the third method, which is getMovie method, the getMovie method is similar to getMovies, but instead of returning a list, it returns a particular movie based on the ID that we specify. Now by default, all these controllers returns a JSON type of object, and also the createMovie method accepts the JSON payload. Now let me run this application and see how it behaves. Now as you can see, my movies endpoint returns a list of movies present within my database, and the format of this is a JSON format. Similarly, you also have a post endpoint, and to the post endpoint we can add a movie to the database by calling the post endpoint, and the payload type again is a JSON here. Okay, so it's returning 200. Okay, so now we have two movies. If you go back again and start hitting that, then we should return two objects. Now we will use this controller as the baseline, and then we will update the movie controller to accept the XML content type in the request body and produce the XML response. So before we start working on XML, we first need to add the jackson-XML dependency to your project. Now, if you're working on the Gradle-based project, then you do that in the build.gradle file. Or if you're working on the Maven-based project, then you do that on the pom.xml file. So in this case, I'm using the Gradle-based project. So I have a build.gradle file, and in my build.gradle file, I need to add the dependency. So here we need to add the jackson-dataformat-xml. And this is from the fast XML. So I would recommend to go for fast XML. Now, once we have our dependencies added, we can update our controller to accept the XML type of content. Let's go back to movies controller here. And in the movies controller, we haven't defined any content type or accept type. We now have to update that. Now we can do that within the request mapping annotation. The request mapping annotation provides two other properties called consumes and produces, and with that property we can specify the media type that we want to either accept or to return. Now let's do the produces. Produces basically means the content type. Now the content type is media type application XML value. So we are basically wants to return a XML type of response. Similarly, we can also provide the accept type by using the consumes property, And for consumes, again, let's use application XML value. Now that we have specified the content type and accept type header, our movies controller will produce a XML output, and it will also accept the XML input type. Now, so far we have specified the media type configuration in the controller level, which means that all the methods defined within the controller will now consume the XML and also produce the XML output. We can also do the same thing at individual method level. But if you want to do that individually at method level, then we need to specify the produces and consumes property to our get mapping. Now here we can do produces, and you can specify whatever the type of media you want to return. But now for this example, let's keep it at the global level, and we'll run the application and see how this application behaves. Now in the Postman, while making the request, we need to now specify the header type. For example, if you add the content type as application XML, then it will produce the XML output. Now let's go back to our post endpoint, and in the post endpoint, instead of passing a JSON payload, now we will pass a XML payload, and we want our application to react to that. It will take the XML and convert that into Java object and then store that into our backend database. Now, in order to do that, we also need to specify the header. And in this case, we need to add the content type as application XML and accept type as application XML. Okay, so now as you see, it returns it 200. Okay, that means my post endpoint also accepts the XML payload and then stores into my database. Now let's go back to our movies endpoint again. And here I'm trying to hit that again. So it should return another item. So right now we have like 3 movies in our database. This method will work fine, but the configuration is now at the controller level, and the default media type still remains the JSON for all other controllers. So if you want to create a API endpoint that returns a mixed response, then this approach is fine. But if you want to override the settings globally and you want to update the content negotiation for all controller throughout the project, then we can do that by implementing a WebMVC configurer configuration. Now to do that, let me go to my API. Maybe I can create a new package called config. And here let us create a new configuration class. Let me call this as app config. First, let's mark it as a configuration annotation. And here this app config will implement a WebMVC configurer. And here we need to override the method to configure the default content negotiation strategy. So let me override the method here. Okay, so this is the method we need to override. And here we need to specify the default content type as media type .application XML. Now, if we want to test this, we can remove our produces and consumes annotation here. So let's put that to default. And when you run your application, it will see the default output as XML now. Okay, so as you can see now, by default, it used to be JSON, but with our default content negotiation strategy that we defined, it is now returning a XML type of response. Notice that the XML response is not very readable. The object is wrapped inside an element called list, and it is not very clear what type of list it is. Let us now update that so that it reflects the type of object. So instead of making it as a list, we want to return movies. Now, in order to do that, we need to create a wrapper class for movies. Now let's go back to my controller. So instead of returning a list here, I would say let's create a class called movies. And here let us create the getter, setter, and constructors. And I'm using Lombok to generate this boilerplate code. And here let us add another annotation called Jackson XML root element and provide the local name as movies. Now this will be the root element, which is the movies element in our XML document. Here the movies object is a wrapper object, and it will contain the list of movies. So let us now create a list of type movies. This is a little bit confusing because we have movies object and then we also have movies list inside it. So we need to change that property. So instead of returning a movies list as a sub element, I would again use the Jackson XML property. And to the Jackson XML property, we can use the name or local name as movie. So that is all we need to do here. And from the controller, instead of returning a list, now we will return the object of movies. Okay, so have I created a constructor? Yeah, so we have a required argument constructor, but I haven't made the movies list as final. So now my controller is complete. So let's run this application again. Now this looks better already because we have now, instead of list, we are now returning movies. But the problem is we are returning two levels of movie. So let's change that. In order to change it, again, go back to your movies class here. And here we need to disable the wrapping by using the Jackson XML element wrapper annotation. And to the annotation, we need to pass use wrapping as false. Now this will fix the problem. As you can notice, the output is much better already. So now we have a movies list, and under movies list, we have one object called movie. Similarly, all the movie objects are grouped under movies list, and it is much easier to read, and you can clearly know what type of object it is by looking at your response. This is all for today. If you have any question, please let me know in the comment section below. I'll reply as soon as I can. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.